Empecemos.
Antes que nada, y dar la bienvenida que corresponde, queremos pedirle a todos que en este acto mantengamos silenciados, como en todos, los micrófonos. Especialmente durante toda la sesión. Por favor, no compartir pantalla. Las preguntas se van a poder enviar en inglés por medio de este chat. Hi. Welcome, all of you, to a free and open international order, Japan and Latin America roles, here at our Council of Foreign Relations, CAI. This academic session is going to be by Mr. Kunchiko Miyaki, advisor of the Japan Chief of Government. But first, we're going to the President of our Council of Foreign Relations, José Octavio Bordón, are going to share his views. And then also in the welcome word, the Ambassador of Japan in Argentina, Takahiro Nakasami. President Bordón, your turn.
Thank you so much. Good morning and good evening, all of you, the people that is in Japan and the people that are in South America. Well, it's very glad for us to host today Professor Kuni Miyaki. In general, he preferred to say Kuni and no Kunihiko, is short. It's in spite of that, being the special advisor at the government, he is a very important founder and director of one of the most important think tanks and member of the most important universities in Tokyo. At the same time, to say thanks, Ambassador Nakami, for your permanent conversation and support of our activities that we are able to share with you. Finally, only one word is that today we know that how important is Japan for the history, the culture, the third economic power in the world, a technological leader, a cultural leader, a big and very important democracy. But at the same time, for us, it's very important today because we need to increase the knowledge about the big strategies, the strategist idea of Japan about what will happen with the new order or the new disorder, the new challenge and the new problems that we are facing today. And for this reason, to receive the Japan geopolitical strategy and how Tokyo sees Argentina, it is very important for all of us. And thank you so much again, Professor Miyaki.
Thank you, President Bordón. Mr. Ambassador in Argentina from Japan, Takahiro Nakasami, please, your welcome word to this encounter.
Thank you very much. Good evening to you all here in Argentina, and good morning to Tokyo. It is my great pleasure to have Mr. Miyake Kunihiko with us today. I would like to thank Ambassador Jose Octavio Bordón, President of Argentine Council for International Relations, for hosting this event. My special thanks to Mr. Miyake for this valuable opportunity to learn his insights on the concept of the free and open international order and its implications for Japan and Latin America. Mr. Miyake used to be our senior colleague in our Japanese Foreign Service. And personally, I am very proud of being one of his followers of his duty in the Japanese embassy in Baghdad, in charge of our Iraqi post-conflict reconstruction efforts. Well, Indo-Pacific situation is an issue of increasing and global attention. And it is very interesting to think about what it means for our bilateral context between Japan and Argentina too. I am so excited, therefore, to hear with you today the views of Mr. Miyake, who is one of the most renowned opinion leader on international affairs and the Japanese foreign policy, and currently special advisor to the cabinet. Well, let me stop here, reiterating my thanks to everyone for participating in this event and wishing it to be a fruitful one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I was going to read the long curriculum vitae but you said it all. Now it's my pleasure to invite and to give the floor to Kuni Miyake, advisor of the Japan Chief of Government. Please, the floor is yours.
Buenos noches. This is Kuni Miyake. Good afternoon or good evening, I would say. It's good morning, so I need some coffee in front of me. But to be honest, it's a great opportunity. I really appreciate the invitation. And I have about 40 some minutes. I'd like to cover what's happening in this part of the world. So before I use my slides, I just want to talk about Afghanistan. As you know, you have seen the pictures and videos and all the chaos in the Kabul airport in the past week. It is a heartbreaking, a very terrible thing. But as far as I'm concerned, it symbolizes a sort of a big power shift happening in the Eurasian continent. And I will tell you the reason why. But before that, I like to ensure that I can show you my slides properly. What shall I do? Oh, this is it. This must be it.
Yeah, you have shared screen in the down. Okay, good.
Is everything fine?
Close to fine. Okay,
Good.
Marcelo is okay? Okay.
So let me first talk about Afghanistan. You see, we are in the middle of a huge power shift. And the priority of the US foreign policy is changing. When our Prime Minister, Suga, visited Washington, D.C., and had a summit meeting with President Biden, it was the 16th of April. But 2 days before the summit meeting, President Biden announced a withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan. So in 2 days, America is leaving Afghanistan and meeting with the Prime Minister of Japan. What does it mean? This means that the priority of the US foreign policy and the national security policy is changing. Well, it's not that the war on terror, war on international terrorism is over. It is still there. It is still there, but see, right after the World War II, we had a Cold War with the Soviet Union. And in a sense, the United States of America won the war. And then Osama bin Laden attacked Washington and New York City. Then the war on terror started in 2001. 20 years later, while they are fighting, the Americans are fighting in the Middle East on the ground. China is not only catching up with the Americans, but maybe in the eyes of the Americans, try to challenge the hegemony of the United States in the Western Pacific and the maritime domain. And Americans finally realized that. About a few years ago, finally they realized that. We've been insisting that China will be a problem for years, but finally Americans started to realize that China could be a great threat to the United States. So that's why they are leaving Afghanistan, no matter what. Well, too bad. It's a very heartbreaking scene, but I think Mr. Biden is determined to change its policy, the policy and focus more on the Indo-Pacific. So this is the kind of power shift of strategic or geopolitical transformation we are witnessing in the Eurasian continent. So I just want to share with you today, as much as I can, that where we are, where Japan is, and what to do, and then what's going to happen. Thank you for asking me what the Japanese sort of strategy is. I think in the long run, in a nutshell, we are aging. We have a population of 130 million, but the population is shrinking gradually, okay? And we cannot expect a high growth rate anymore, economic growth. So while we are aging and the population is shrinking, but we have to survive, and we are facing a challenge from China. So what is our policy? Our policy is about our survival. How do we survive in the middle of this huge strategic or geopolitical transformation in our neighborhood? This is what I'm going to talk about today. So allow me to show you some pictures, but they are all important. So let me start with this. I hope. This is the map of Iraq. I hope I could show you the map of Afghanistan, but it's much more complicated than Iraq. So how I see the world in the geopolitical context. Geopolitics, as you know, you are all experts, so I don't have to go into details. Iraq is a flat land with two great rivers, and so flat, but so vulnerable. They are surrounded by four major powers. Historically, they have Turks in the north, and they have Persians in the east, and they have Bedouins in the south, and Greeks and Romans in the west. So in a nutshell, it is so fertile, prosperous, two great rivers, but whenever they are prosperous, one of those four enemies, or I would say neighbors, invade them. So this is the vulnerability, geopolitical risk of Iraq. I lived there twice. I was posted there twice, and I know exactly how they feel. They are defenseless and they are vulnerable. In addition to that, I like to talk about the concept of power vacuum. I don't think it's a strange concept for you. You know, everybody knows this concept. The power vacuum is created whenever a powerful force leaves the nation. So what's happening in Afghanistan, for example, is a power vacuum now. So somebody is going to fill in the blanks, fill in the vacuum. So the Chinese are doing it, Russians are doing it, Iranians are doing it. Of course, Pakistan is most successful doing it. But in the case of Iraq, let me show you a good example. In 2011, President Obama decided to withdraw US forces from Iraq. And he did, to my surprise, because they are very happy because young soldiers are coming back home. But I was so worried about the power vacuum in Iraq. The southern part of Iraq is inhabited by the Shia Muslims. And the northern part is basically Sunni Muslims. So, but there's a huge vacuum in Iraq, and somebody's going to fill in the vacuum. Who did it? In the south, Shia Muslim area, it was Iranian Republican Revolutionary Guard. They just took over. And in the north, ISIS took over. This is how I see the power vacuum concept. Okay, so Iraq is vulnerable. Why? Because they only have land borders. Japan is better protected by the waters because we are surrounded by the waters. So take a look at Argentina, one of my favorite countries, and I wish I can talk about bilateral relations, but I leave it to Ambassador Nakamai, and I will focus on the strategic issues today. But this is Argentina, as you see. But this is a continental nation, very great nation. But I just want you to be feeling like a Japanese for 30 minutes. I want you to be an islander. So you are not a continental power anymore. You'll be an island like this. Okay? Maybe we have a Brazilian friend, I'm afraid, but let's suppose that Brazil is the water. This is an island nation of Argentina. Okay, but this is a remote sort of island in the middle of waters. But Japan is not like this. Japan is like this. You see, sorry, Argentina is a bit smaller, but Japan is located off the coast of a huge continent, and the distance is not too close, but not too far. It's a very vulnerable sort of location. And this is what Japan is in East Asia. Okay, so this geopolitical or geographic location is extremely important. So please keep that in mind, because we are a maritime nation. We are an islander nation. We are not continental. We can protect ourselves, but at the same time, we always have to focus on our relationship with the continent. And this is how I see my country. Okay, then I will move on to the way I see the world. Unfortunately, this is probably a violation of the intellectual property rights of the Star Wars movies. But so please forget that I showed you nothing. Okay, you didn't see anything. But there are 3 or 4 Star Wars movies I really enjoyed, and taking advantage of the titles of Star Wars movies, I like to explain to you how I see the world. Okay, first, on the left-hand side, Star Wars, The Force Awakens. Have you seen this movie? I really enjoy this movie. I say it's not The Force Awakens. It is the dark side awakens. Dark side is what? Dark side is the combination of very ugly, unhealthy, I would say nationalistic, xenophobic, populistic, discriminatory sort of sentiment. It's prevailing in the United States. Look at the Trump phenomenon, and it's all over Europe, the same. And even in East Asia, we have a nationalistic movements, especially in China. Number 2, the poster in the middle. The title of the movie is The Empire Strikes Back. I say it's not The Empire Strikes Back. It is The Empires Strike Back. Why? The plural. Yes, those dark side empires, I would say, is not single. It's not only one. There are many, unfortunately. For example, Russia is coming back. This is another empire. China is also the same. Maybe Iran could be another empire. Those empires are striking back. They are coming back with ugly, nationalistic, populistic, xenophobic, discriminatory sort of ideologies. That's my concern, second concern. The third concern on your right, it's called Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. I haven't seen this movie, but I wouldn't say Phantom Menace. I say the nuclear menace. The nuclear proliferation is unstoppable. You see, North Korea they have weapons already. And this is the reality, and Iran may have it. And I don't want to name, but some other countries are very promising candidates for the nuclear power in the future. And of course, Japan will be the last to become a nuclear state because we are the only victim of the nuclear weapons. Okay. So all in all, I like to show you this movie, The Return of the Jedi. Okay, this is my favorite movie, but I wouldn't say Return of the Jedi. What has returned? Return of nationalism. This is how I see the world. Okay, please forget about the posters. Let's move on. This is the map of China in the 2nd century BC. I'm sorry, I had no time to translate into Spanish or English, but this is the China of the 2nd century BC, 102 BC. The red China is not, of course, communist China. Red China is a Han Chinese China, okay? And as you saw in the map, on the map of Iraq, any nation has a sort of competitors or neighbors, powerful neighbors in the north, in the east, in the west, and the south. So China is no exception. I painted those potential threat in yellow, and this is the northern barbarian in the eyes of the Chinese in the 2nd century BC. I will show you the transformation of China, Han Chinese, for the past 2,100 years in 21 seconds. A bit short, but please take a look, okay? Please take a look. This is the 2nd century BC, 2nd century AD, the 5th century, then the big Tang dynasty became and gets smaller, then much smaller, and then Qin dynasty came and Mongolians took over, then Ming dynasty resurrected, but got smaller again. Qin dynasty came in, Russians came down to the south, and Japan came in, and it is China of present. I'm sorry, it's too fast. Okay, so I like to show you the maps again slowly with more time. 2nd century BC, they have a northern barbarian here, and they were the threat. In the 2nd century AD, still the barbarians, threat comes from the north. In the 5th century, still the threat comes from the north. That is the reason why China built the Great Walls, okay? And still, after this, they still continue building. But in the 7th century, the Tang dynasty became a huge empire, and things seems to have changed. Now look, this is the middle of the 8th century, and the Tang dynasty shrunk to the location like this. You have Central Asia, and you have mainland China, Han Chinese territory. Then you have a corridor here. I hope you can see it. And you see Uyghurs here and Tibetans here. The Han Chinese strategic vulnerability is always that they could be sandwiched by the barbarians in Uyghur area and Tibet. And this is the typical geopolitical vulnerability of Han Chinese. I go on. In the 11th century, the size of the Han Chinese shrunk. Why? Because the neighbors got stronger. Neighbors is much more powerful. That's why they shrunk. They further shrunk. The yellow one is Qin dynasty. That's a Manchurian dynasty. Then Mongolians took over in the 13th century. And the 15th century, it's a Ming dynasty, resurrected. Han Chinese are back. But at the same time, you have Tataris and Uyghurs and Tibetans also coming back. So they also resurrected. Then the 17th century, as you see, the Han Chinese shrunk. Why? Because the neighbors got stronger. Then you see this another dynasty, the Manchurian dynasty, is on the rise, and they took over the entire China as Qin dynasty in the 18th century. Then the Russians, it's another neighbor for us too, came down to take Vladivostok here like this, and Japan came in and left, and here it is. This is the history of Han Chinese over the past 21 centuries. What should I learn? What can we learn from these maps? There are so many. You can write 200 books on China out of this, but I have only two conclusions to share with you today. Number one, it's very simple. The size of Han Chinese depends on the balance of power balance between China and their neighbors. So the neighbors got powerful, China shrinks. And the neighbor is weak, China expands. Okay, so this is very simple. So what about, second conclusion is, what about the current threat, potential threat to China? What about the land borders, as you see here? Now, what's the northern barbarians, or northern threat? Russians. But Russia is not an enemy of China anymore. They are not allies, but they are not probably friends, but they could be tactical partners. Okay, their land border in the north, to the north, is secure. They have Manchuria, they have Inner Mongolia, they have Uyghur area, Xinjiang, Uyghur, they have Tibet. And what about the southern threat? Their threat to the south is not India. No. Indians not gonna go over the Himalayas. It's too high. And they have Tibet as a buffer. So they don't need to go invade. The most powerful sort of a challenger or victim of the Chinese empire has been Vietnam. Look, in the second century BC or second century AD, North Vietnam has been occupied by the Chinese. 2,000 years ago, they were occupied by the Chinese already. Okay, so that means what? Their land border is secure. The last war against Vietnam was 1979. They couldn't win though. Vietnam was very powerful, but that was the last war, with the exception of some, I would say, skirmishes in the between India and China recently. I would say the land border of China is completely secure. They have no enemies. They have no threat on the border, land border. Then why they spend so much money on defense? Why do they buy so many aircraft carriers, so many missiles? Why? Very simple. Because the threat to China doesn't come from land. It comes from the sea. Why the threat comes from the sea? Because, very simple, the most prosperous and vulnerable China is on the Pacific coast, from Tianjin to Hong Kong. And they are the most prosperous part of China, but China feels that they are challenged by Japan-US security treaty. This is how they see the security situation in that part of the world, okay? And this map shows the movements of goods, not services, basically goods on the ships in and out of Japan. And look how important the South China Sea is. Singapore is here, Strait of Malacca is here, and many routes had to go through this strait and the waters near Taiwan. This is the reality. We are heavily dependent on maritime shipment and maritime trade because we are an island nation. We don't have resources. We have only human resources. So the only thing for us to survive is to live on trade and add values to our products. And in order to do that, we need sea lines of communication. That's how a maritime nation depends on and live. So this is the strategy of Japan as far as the strategic aspect is concerned. Unfortunately, China has a different dream and a different strategy. It's a one belt, one road idea. But as you see, people are concerned about those routes, but please, from the eyes of the Indians, one belt, one road is a containment policy of India as well. So this is why India is joining us now. And unfortunately, sorry, this is also in Japanese, but you can see the red lines, two red lines in here. Number one, this is called first island chain, starting from Kyushu of Japan, Okinawa, Taiwan, then the Philippines, and encircling most of the South China Sea. This is called first island chain. And China says, well, this is first island chain, and water areas in here will be Chinese. So don't mess with us. You see, you have to make a deal with us if you want to use it. Okay. Now it's not the end. The second island chain, starting from Tokyo, Ogasawara Islands, through Guam Island to the Papua New Guinea. This is what they call the second island chain. And they say, well, by 2020s, 30s, 40s, you never know, the west of this second island chain will be waters of China. Okay, so Americans, the Pacific is so big. So why don't we divide the Pacific and share the water areas? For Japan, it's not acceptable because those blue lines are Japanese sea lines of communication. And we cannot accept anybody control this South China Sea area, water areas, which is a public asset for the world. So unfortunately, this is exactly what's happening in our part of the world. First and second island chains virtually deny freedom of navigation in the Western Pacific. This is how I see it. Okay. This is the map of showing the range of Chinese short-range, mid-range missiles. Very accurate, precision-guided, very powerful. They can kill the American aircraft carrier now. So the mid-range missiles range is about 1,300, 400, 500 kilometers. So it can easily cover the entire Japan and easily cover the East China Sea. And of course, easily cover most of the South China Sea. And how vulnerable we became over the past 10 years, 5-10 years. This is where we are, and this is what we face now. And it's called A2AD strategy of China. They don't call it A2AD. Americans call it A2AD, anti-access area denial policy. In a nutshell, this is the first island chain, and this is the second island chain. China wants to kick out all the Western forces from this part of the waters, period. So we are located just on the first island chain. And Taiwan is part of it. Philippines is part of it. And Americans are now finding it more and more difficult to get closer to the Chinese continent. This is the map showing, symbolically showing the danger of the A2AD policy. Well, of course, I didn't paint the water in red, but the redder you go, the more dangerous you become. That's the concept made by the American think tank. So look, the Japan Sea and East China Sea, Yellow Sea, and South China Sea are all red. And it is becoming more and more and more difficult to be there. So maybe 1996, the Taiwan presidential election was held. China launched 2 missiles to threaten or the Taiwanese, but Americans sent 2 aircraft carriers and let them go through the strait. But it's not going to happen anymore. It's too dangerous for the American US Navy to do that. All right. So then I have about 10 minutes from now, so I like to conclude. But before I draw my conclusion, I want to show you the map of the rotating US maritime forces. US maritime forces consist of the Navy and the Marines. The US Navy has, as you see, 11 aircraft carriers. The red dots symbolize the aircraft carriers and carrier battle group. And the CVN-73, for example, it's an old one. This is the map of 2010, and this is the CVN-73 is this 73 George Washington. It was home ported in Yokosuka. Now they have we have Ronald Reagan aircraft carrier. As you see, this is the movement of the aircraft carrier. What about the blue dots? Blue dots represent the Marine Corps in amphibious assault ship. We call it light carriers. You know, they cannot use fixed wing aircraft, but they can use F-35B or Harrier or choppers. They have about 9, maybe 7 or 8 amphibious assault ships for the Marines, and at that time 11 aircraft carriers for the Navy. So put them all together, approximately 20 carriers and light carriers they have rotating all over the world. And I like to give you another 21 seconds, I'm sorry, to show you the movements of those aircraft carriers, battle group, and Marine units on the waters. It's very quick. This map is as of the June 6th of 2010. And I will show you the movements of those forces until April 2011. Why April 2011? Because in March 2011, we have a huge earthquake, then tsunami came, and the Tohoku area was struck. So at that time, US forces sent their units to rescue and help our colleagues in Tohoku area. It's called Operation Tomodachi. So the Tomodachi operation is shown in this map. That's why I picked the April of 2011. So I will show you the movements for those 9 months in 21 seconds, okay? Please take a look, especially take a look at the Asian part, this area, and the Middle East, okay? So I will show you, I will start moving those ships. Please take a look. This is 2010, June, August, September, October, November. Then you have a Christmas holiday, New Year came, the earthquake came, and tsunami came, and this is the Operation Tomodachi, as you see. I repeat, this is 2010 June, August, September, November, Christmas holidays, New Year, earthquake, and tsunami, and this is the Operation Tomodachi. As you see, this is a scary map for the Japanese, at least. Why? You see two aircraft carrier battle groups near Japan. And you have another marine unit near Japan. Why? Because they're conducting Operation Tomodachi. But what if there had been no earthquake? What if there had been no tsunami? And still, if you have two aircraft carriers near Japan and one marine unit deployed there, what does it mean? Well, logical conclusion is a Korean Peninsula contingency, a crisis in the Korean Peninsula. That's the only conclusion I can have. So let's suppose that this is the Korean Peninsula contingency. In the same week as you see, in the Middle East, you have two aircraft carriers in the Indian Ocean or in the Arabian Sea, and you have another marine unit in the neighborhood. Then you also have one marine unit in the Mediterranean Sea. It's bigger than East Asia. Why? Because at that time, Iran was a problem, and still is. So you have two aircraft carriers here and two aircraft carriers here. Why so scary? It is very scary. I know there might be some military experts in the audience, but if my understanding is correct, you see, I told you that there are only 11 aircraft carriers the Navy had at that time. Now they have only 10, by the way. And they're building another new 11th now, but at that time they had only 11. They used to have 15 or 16, but now they had only 11. And usually the number of units you can use is probably 1/3 of what you have, because the one unit is fighting now, and the second unit should be ready for the next fight, and the third unit needs maintenance and repair. So that's why usually you can use 1/3 of all the units you have. So if my understanding is correct, 11 divided by 3 equals almost 4 maximum. That means usually you can use only 4 aircraft carriers at a time. Now they are using it already. So what is the most scary part of this map is, I may be wrong, maybe coincidental, but look at the South China Sea. It's empty. Americans are not there because they are busy in Korea and they're busy in the Gulf. So what if you have two contingencies on Earth, one in Asia and one in the Middle East, and thank God not in South America, then what if somebody tries to do something new to change the status quo by force? And who's going to take care of that? Americans may not be able to do that. So who's going to secure the sea lines of communication in this part of the world? This is the most scary part of this map, okay? So let me finish. I have 4 more minutes, and let me finish quickly. As you see, this is what if Argentina were an island, well, just imagine, this is the typical map of the United Kingdom on your left, and you have a typical map of Japan on your right. But when I want to think strategically or geopolitically, I sometimes reverse or make the map upside down. As you see like this. See, do you notice the resemblance, similarity between the two maps? You see, you are a small island nation located off the coast of a huge continent where the monsters reside. There are monsters and barbarians all the time on the continent. How could you maximize the national interest of the island nation, which has abundant human resources, but virtually no natural resources? There are only three conditions for that. Number one, balance of power on the continent. You see, because there are barbarians and monsters living on the continent. And if one of them becomes powerful, so powerful, it could be a threat to the island nation because the island nation is too close to the continent. So that's why the British interfered in European affairs when Napoleon came, Hitler came, and Stalin came. This is number one. Number two, very simple, healthy distance from the continent. You see, you cannot interfere, an island nation cannot interfere with continental affairs forever because we are an islander and we will just exhaust ourselves. So you should stay away from continental affairs as much as you can. The Brits fought 30 years in France for nothing. We fought in China for 10, 20 years for nothing. See, this is the second element, condition for the island nation to prosper. Thirdly, needless to say, securing sea lines of communication. Because we are islanders, we live on trade, we are heavily dependent on free trade system. That's why we need strong Navy, and that's why we have to secure sea lines of communication. This is a strategy, not my invention. This is the concept I stole from the British strategy. British strategy vis-a-vis the European continent. So Japan is Britain in East Asia. And we are not too far away from the continent, but not too close. But we want to be independent. We want to survive. We want to survive the shrinking times. But unfortunately, we are facing the rise of China. Hopefully it's peaceful, but unfortunately, it may not be. So what do we need? Island alliance. Islanders, the United Kingdom, we used to have Anglo-Japanese alliance before the World War II. And now we have an island alliance with the United States. Hey, why? The United States is the biggest island nation, biggest maritime nation in the world. And then I would say we are making friends with other island nations like Australia. Australia is the second biggest island nation in the world. Okay, and India. India is not an island, it's a subcontinental nation, but still shares many interests, maritime interests with us. And you have Singapore, you have Indonesia, and you have Taiwan. These are potential allies and friends of Japan. So we are not heavily dependent, we are still dependent on the United States, the US-Japan Security Treaty, but we are not making NATO, but as an islander, we have to expand the network of island nations to secure sea lines of communication in our part for Japan to survive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Miyaki. It was you just given us a terrific presentation, a lot to know about history. But let me say something. You have an omission about the science fiction field. You know, there is an important scholar also in another school of science fiction, that is Star Trek. And you remember that in Star Trek, you have the United Federation of Planets. It's a Vulcan word. So perhaps we have to push to the Star Trek more than Star Wars. Thanks for your presentation. Now we have a lot of questions here.
Yes.
And but we have a special guest from the embassy. So please, Mr. Matthias Spector, it's your time to ask the first question. Then we'll read the others.
Yes.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Mr. Miyaki, for the presentation. It's full of important propositions. Let me try and push you a little bit on the implications of your argument. You presented a world that is multipolar, that is very nasty, lots of great powers pushing one against the other. And of course, China as a major threat. And you said that when China confronts weak neighbors, then it expands. And you also said that Japan is weaker now than it was 30, 40 years ago.
Or 70 years ago.
Demographics and because of economics. So the question is, what's the strategic conception for Japan? Because balance of power, which is what you're suggesting, which is what Britain did, has a premise that doesn't seem to work in the context of Japan, right? In the case of Britain, facing a hostile Napoleon in Europe, you had domestic opinion very strongly committed to balancing Napoleon, and you had a lot of allies that were willing and able to push against Napoleon as well. And even in that context, it took Britain 6 different campaigns to try and get it done. Whereas in the case of Japan, it seems to me that domestic politics push in a different direction. When former Prime Minister Abe tried to—
Not necessarily though. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, wonderful. So tell us, what's the story for domestic support in Japan for a balancing of China coming from Japan? And what's the support you think you will find elsewhere in Asia? Because you listed India, Australia, Taiwan, and Indonesia, but also it seems to me, at least, that many of these countries are not willing to abandon a policy of engagement with China to move towards a policy of confrontation. So
very
what
good
are the
questions.
conditions at home and in the region for that kind of balancing?
Let me try to answer your very important questions. 3 of them very important. Number one, you talked about the British versus Napoleon at that time. And I will tell you, Japan, the situation is worse than the Brits vis-a-vis the Napoleon. Why? You know, I had a chance to talk to a British scholar several years ago and told him, he asked me, what is it like in the eyes of the Japanese? I mean, what is the China is like in the eyes of the Japanese? And I said, well, aren't you British? He said, yes. Okay. So just imagine that there's a huge European continent in front of you with the population of hundreds of million people speaking one language under one government, under authoritarian system. Either they speak, all of them, all the Europeans speak French under Napoleon, or all of the Europeans speak German under Hitler, or all of the Europeans speak Russian under Stalin. China is one of those 3, or maybe all of them combined. So Europe is still divided, or I would say diversified. But China is already united And unfortunately, they are not free democratic nation. They are united under Chinese communism and speak one language. It's much, much, much more powerful than Napoleon unifying Europe, or Hitler unifying Europe, or Stalin unifying Europe. This is the threat we are facing. It is much, much, much worse than the Brits case. That's number one. Number two, you talked about the some voices in Japan to try to balance between China and the United States. It has been so, but it's an old story. I tell you, as of 2010, 2010, and 2012, there are two important incidents took place around the Senkaku Islands. The Chinese vessel came into and rammed the Japanese Coast Guard vessel. And we had a crisis twice, 2010 and 2012, around Senkaku. And the people of Japan finally realized that, oh, this is real. They are coming. They want to take it. This is the first present and clear threat and danger, physical threat we ever experienced since 1945. This is not even the Russians didn't do that. But the threat around Senkaku was so alarming that many Japanese woke up. Okay, that is related to the third question of yours. Good question. Why we abandoned, you asked, engagement policy and become more confrontational. No, never. Our policy vis-a-vis China always consists of engagement and deterrence. Okay, it has been the case and it will be the case. But until the Senkaku incidents, those two incidents, we put engagement in front of deterrence. But now we have to put deterrence in front of engagement. But we will not abandon the policy of engagement if they so desire. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. We have more questions. Now I receive one from our General Secretary, Ambassador Ricardo Lagorio. He asked this, Mr. Miyake, your threat assessment is a hard powered oriented one. You don't see any soft power threat driven by science, technology, and environment?
Good question too. But unfortunately, this is more theoretical, or I wouldn't call it utopian, but as I explained to you in 2012 and 2010, we faced a physical military threat. So, of course, the other means to deter a potential threat is possible, economic means, other means, but that's a part of the engagement, as I explained. And of course, we do not abandon the policy of engagement. And we still want to talk to them. And we still want to engage with them in the arena of the climate change, economic assistance, technological cooperation. There are so many fields we want to engage the Chinese. But unfortunately, what they are doing is the opposite. Look what they are doing in Uyghur, what they are doing in Hong Kong. See, we want to talk to them, but they are conducting wolf warrior foreign policy, to my surprise. They have changed. They really changed their foreign policy style, especially for the past, maybe when Mr. Xi Jinping came to power. It is a dramatic change. And we used to have more cooperation, dialogues and cooperation with the Chinese side. And the United States has the same thing. But as far as US, Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, I would say Vietnam, they are all threatened in one way or another. So yes, I agree with him on that other means should be pursued. I fully agree with him. The question is, it takes two to tango, and you need a partner who share the similar views, at least minimum level of universal values. Otherwise, we cannot engage anybody. That's my answer. I cannot hear you.
I was on mute.
Yes, yes.
Sorry. I was trying to, we have another question from Martin Piñeiro. He's a very well-known part of our council. And he's asking this: in the context of your very interesting presentation, how do you see QUID evolving, the quadrilateral security dialogue?
Quad.
Quad, yeah, quad.
Quad.
Yeah.
Quad is not an alliance. Quad is a forum of like-minded countries to expand the values, universal values, democracy, freedom, rule of law, human rights, humanitarianism. And the United States are our natural partner. And as I explained to you, the second island nation in the world, Australia, joined us for similar reasons, because we share values with them. Then finally, Indians joined us, probably thanks to the Chinese side. You know, they had a fight, fist fight, or maybe stone fighting in the mountains in the Himalayas. So that really forced India to join us, to my surprise. And Quad is not an alliance. It is just a forum, and it won't be a NATO-like alliance at all. But like-minded nations may increase. The British may join us. Koreans, well, I don't know. They are too close to China as well. I mean, geographically, geologically, I would say. Then Philippines, they're trying. Vietnam is a communist nation. So there are not many, but there are still the number of candidates, potential candidates of Quad will be increasing. So it could be quartet, could be quintet, sextet, or we may not be an orchestra, but we have more and more like-minded nations in that forum. But this is just a forum, and our policy is to engage China. It's not to confront China. But if necessary, we should be able to deter China at the same time.
Thank you, sir. We have 7 minutes more. The next question is from our academic secretary, Juan Bataleme. He's asking this: the free and open Indo-Pacific area demands an important naval military component. It is possible for Japan Defense Forces to combine efforts with Australia, United Kingdom, and the US to launch a successful sea blockade. How do you consider the BRI capacity to replace goods, ships by sea and by land?
Excuse me, I just missed the last part of your question.
Yeah.
Japan take initiative to do what?
How do you consider the BRI capacity to replace goods, ships by sea and by land? I can open the microphone.
I understand.
Okay, good.
Well, it's another great question, but if my understanding is correct, maritime transport cost is the cheapest on Earth. Land transportation is always expensive. So what China is doing on the Eurasian continent, one belt, one road. It's a great concept, beautiful. It's a combination of old projects which didn't take off. Why? Because it was too costly. Because they have to build roads, they have to build railways. This is so costly, and maritime shipment is much, much cheaper. So if I understand your question correctly, it's so difficult to replace maritime shipment with something else. Did I answer your question?
It's a question of our secretary. I think is good. We have two more.
Okay.
From Ivan Gadi. Thank you for your presentation. Given the current situation and the challenges it presents, do you consider it is possible for Japan to establish a similar initiative, such as the Belt and Road, in order to reshape this unstable situation? And he adds one more thing. Also,
excuse me, could you repeat the first question?
Yeah. I go back. Thank you for the presentation. Given the
para
current
volver
situation.
a ver los que hablan?
Okay, Viviana, cerrar el micrófono, por favor.
Sorry.
Yes. It's okay. Okay, the question is this. Given the current situation and the challenges that it presents, do you consider...
What talented?
The challenges about the current situation of the world.
Okay.
About your presentation? Do you consider that it's possible for Japan? I think the core of the question is this. If you consider that Japan could establish a similar initiative, such as the Belt and Road, you know, the same as China.
Well, we are not that young anymore. We are aging, and we want to age gracefully. You know, we don't want to be too active as we were 70 years ago. We don't want to change the status quo. I mean, we just want to maintain the status quo. You see, they want to change it, but we don't want to change it. We want to keep it as it is. So the initiative of maintaining the status quo is much more subtle and probably less dramatic. If you want to change the world, if you want to change the international order, then you have to be more active and making more enemies than friends. But in our case, we are an island power and status quo power. The status quo power doesn't have to do a lot. We just want to maintain the status quo by doing less for the better and for the more countries in the world. So probably Japan is not ready to take another new dramatic, gigantic international initiative to do something new. Instead, probably we want to continue as much as we can what we have been doing. All kinds of friendship, cooperation, and joint activities with like-minded nations like Argentina and others. This is I think what Japan should do in the foreseeable future. I don't want to try anything new at the cost of at the huge cost for nothing.
Thank you. We have one more question. We have
yes.
minutes, but,
yes.
And it's close to the other. I think you can open the answer also here. And okay, someone put here at me. Okay, thank you for that. Do you know, it's from Nicholas Silling. Do you know about any plan to weaken China by reducing its influence in Latin America? It's about, what do you think? I think.
Well, you see, I think I do not know much about the bilateral relationship with you, but China's main concern is the Taiwan's diplomatic relations. And there are some countries in South America which maintain diplomatic relations with Taiwan. of Republic of China. So Beijing is targeting those countries for good reasons from the eyes of the Chinese. In our case, we don't have a formal diplomatic relationship with Taiwan. Therefore, we have no intention to interfere. But if you have a good relationship with Taiwan, whether it's diplomatic or non-diplomatic, I think this is important because they are a good entity to deal with anyway. Technologically advanced, and I think it's a good place. So probably Chinese priority, Chinese foreign policy's priority is in South America is to number one, of course, to maintain good relationship with those countries, including yours. Then do as much as they can gain support from as many countries as possible from South America in the international arena, including the United Nations fora. And thirdly, as I said, they want to convince some South American countries to cut off the diplomatic relationship with Taiwan. And but mind you, the way they deal with foreign countries. I don't know much about their style in South America, but in Africa, for example, or in the Middle East, for example, in some parts of Asia, for example, they are not popular. Why? Because it is the economic assistance, the economic relations of the Chinese, for the Chinese, by the Chinese. It's not government, it's the economic business relationship for the Chinese, by the Chinese, of the Chinese. So I give you one example. I don't want to name any country in Africa, but there are some poor countries in Africa, and probably some Western nations may not pay due attention to the country. China approaches, and unfortunately, sometimes directly with the leader, top leader, and make a deal with the leader. I don't want to go into details. In a way, they do business in China, the same way they do business in China, and extend economic assistance to that nation. To that extent, that was fine. But the problem is that, let's say they build a dam in a country, or maybe huge building or bridges, whatever infrastructure projects they have. They lend money to the nation. This is a poor nation and it's so difficult to pay back. Interest rate is so high. Then, unfortunately, they send Chinese companies, Chinese workers, and do everything by themselves without benefiting, without those local people benefiting from them. So that means for those countries, China comes, the Chinese come and just lend us money, but the money will be spent for the project of the Chinese, for the Chinese, by the Chinese. And unfortunately, there are many concerns these days, growing concerns among some countries. I'm not saying all of the countries, that they are being ripped off or exploited by the Chinese economic projects. And in some cases, in return for the loan, China wants to reach an agreement for a special sort of interest in natural resources, or maybe potential military posts on the ocean. Those things are very, very strategic. I mean, I admire them. If I were a leader of a country, that is a perfect thing. But it's politics and economic activities combined. So there's no sort of pure economic activities on the part of the Chinese economic assistance. That is the reason why I wanted to pay due attention to. Excuse me, just a minute. ちょっと後で電話します。すみません。Yes, I'm sorry. One TV station called me, so I just declined. So this is not my own invention. I heard it from many countries in Africa, the Middle East, and East Asia. So I hope it's not happening in the South China Sea. Excuse me, South America. And also they are sending their fishermen all over the world. They invade the EEZ of any country and start fishing as much as possible. So these are the things happening everywhere. Ecuador, for example, or Indian Ocean, Africa. So this is our concern. So if they behave as a responsible member of the international community, we are fine. We are ready to deal with them at any time. But if they break the rules and do whatever they want, something for the Chinese, by the Chinese, of the Chinese, people don't trust them.
Thank you, Mr. Kunimiyake. It was very, very clear your answer. Now it's time that you give you some rest. And now it's, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And it's my pleasure to present our Vice President, Francisco de Santibáñez. Francisco, your turn.
Thank you, Guillermo. First of all, I want to thank Special Advisor Kunimiyake for your important participation and contribution today. Just two central aspects of Japan's foreign policy seems clear to me. First of all, its capacity to develop a strategy based on a clear understanding of what's happening now in the world, and especially in the Indo-Pacific region. And I think it's important to understand, especially for our countries in South America, that to have a strategy is key for any country's foreign policy's ability to gain influence in the region and in the world. Moreover, Japan has been a responsible and active player in the international system, where it has also been able to shape its environment to defend its interests and its values. In this sense, I want just to mention a couple of examples. First of all, is the reinterpretation of Japan's constitution to strengthen its alliance with other nations. This is, I think, a key sign of its willingness to adapt to new challenges. Finally, in the presentation, Kunimiyake mentioned the importance of a free and open Indo-Pacific to protect the sea lines of communications. This is actually a concept developed and promoted by the Japanese government. It's a concept that eventually has been adopted by nations such as India, Australia, and even Great Britain and the United States. This is again an example of how an active actor in the international system behaves. To conclude, I think Japan is not only a good friend of Argentina, it's also a good example to follow, and especially for a country such as ours that is in need of a strategic vision. So, Special Advisor, I wish you good morning, and for the rest of the audience, good night. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I just want to add, because I had no time to talk about our great bilateral relationship between Japan and Argentina. I wanted to talk about it, but we have a great ambassador of Mae who has the responsibility to enhance the bilateral relationship. So I leave it to him. Thank you very much.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Professor. Excellent presentation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
We are receiving a lot of kudos of the presentation, and I think we are going to have another one as soon as possible.
Okay.
Thank you for all
Thank
your
you.
effort. President
And good
Bordal,
night.
if you want to say the last words, it's going to be better than mine.
Well,